Okay, you probably have a lot of questions and are wondering how you're going to learn how to do what you just saw. After all, what I just demonstrated is a little bit more advanced than where we are today. So let's deconstruct it and see how it all works. As you've likely figured out by now, markers are really at the heart of the entire superlearning methodology. And for this reason, we'll spend a good amount of time understanding and practicing them in very nitty-gritty detail. So, what makes a good, high-quality, memorable marker that can be easily linked and stored in our long-term memory? Why did I choose the specific images that I did in the demonstration video, and why did I visualize them the way that I did? Well, first and foremost, good markers represent a concept, not a generic concept, but rather a very specific and detailed concept that can be easily retrieved from memory. For example, you wouldn't create a marker for an entire paragraph because there are likely 3 or 4 or even more clusters of important words or points in the paragraph that each deserve a marker. For this reason, rather than summarizing an entire paragraph with just one marker, you would probably do better to encode each of the significant details of the paragraph and let all of those details together add up to one summarizing marker. For example, I had the Garden City, Ebenezer Howard, the United Kingdom, and more. The more detailed and specific, the better. Ideally, you want to remember at least 4 concrete and related details for each summarizing marker. The next important criteria is that good markers are imbued with rich details. They're not foggy or generic mental images. This means that rather than picturing a generic grumpy old man, I pictured a very specific and detailed image of Ebenezer Scrooge. I can tell you what color his hat is, how long his beard is, and what expression he's making in the photo. We do all this in as much detail as we possibly can. If the details are given in the text, this will be very easy, and it'll help you remember specific and particular details as you read them. However, even if the descriptive details are not given, you should create your own, because this mental imaginative process will make the images much more memorable. So, what markers are sufficiently detailed? Well, first, in the first week of training with Anna, she made me physically draw them in my notebook. And given my drawing skills, there was not a lot of detail. But the beauty is not the key here, because if you draw something, it means it's sufficiently detailed for you to imagine it with clarity. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to draw it. The third important criteria of each marker is that a good marker can be easily connected to other markers that come with it. Now, we'll cover that in much more detail later, but for now, it's important that you understand that by using these highly detailed markers, we're able to remember more details with fewer memory points. It's a sort of chunking or compression of information because each detail encodes some of the information. An example of this is that my marker for Henry George happened to be a British historical figure, and my marker for Garden Cities was Rothschild Boulevard, a green boulevard in a real garden city. By selecting markers this way, we create stronger linkages or neural networks between each of our memory points, and as they're all tied together and represented by the details and the markers themselves. I want to point out that remembering the details as opposed to the overall concept is a very important point as well, because if we go from the details, like Henry George, poverty, radial spokes, and the UK, back to the original concept, we have no problem remembering the overarching ideas and concepts of the Garden City. But if I tell you the original concept and just say Garden City, you might forget the details. So we actually focus on memorizing those nitty-gritty details, and we can reverse engineer the overall concept and the meaning and the context from them. The fourth critical aspect of a good marker probably won't come as any surprise. Of course, you have to be able to easily and quickly convert into an image. With time, as you become more creative, you'll be able to convert just about any thought or idea into some kind of an image. But in the beginning, there are definitely some concepts that are easier to generate markers for than others. For example, if I read a paragraph that discussed the relationship of DNA to the study of genetics, which one do you think would be a better marker? You'll probably agree that we can quickly convert the idea of DNA into an image of a double helix. Genetics, however, is a much harder concept to visualize, and so we should probably go with the double helix for the overall marker. The fifth important point to consider here when creating markers is the differentiation between problems and solutions. If the paragraph you're reading presents both a problem and a solution, or a conflict and a resolution, it's always better to prioritize the solution or resolution, not the question. You'll note that I placed an emphasis on radial boulevards, green belts, and 32,000. Why might this be? Well, just like we chose to remember details before broad ideas, you can generally backtrack your way to the problem, in this case overcrowding, from the solution very easily. Oftentimes, the question is actually found in the answer, so to speak. If you remember the solution, for example, East and West Germany, you'll have a much easier time remembering where the conflict or the problem came from, in this case, World War II. The sixth and last element of a good marker is that it connects to existing information wherever possible. Just like I connected my knowledge about British kings, internet memes, and the city that I live in. Now, of course, much of what you learn will hopefully be new information, and so this won't necessarily be easy. However, it's reasonable to assume that a lot of the knowledge that you're trying to acquire is loosely related to existing knowledge in even the most loose or tenuous way. You may not know a lot about Napoleon, but you probably have seen a portrait of him with his hand tucked into his jacket, and even that minimal connection provided by using such an image as your marker is enough to make the information just a bit more relevant to your hippocampi. This, by the way, is why sensory markers like the taste of chocolate are so effective. You've probably tasted chocolate thousands of times, and your brain knows by now that anything related to chocolate must be important. So there are the 6 things to keep in mind as you become better at creating markers. As we mentioned, you should try to create markers or a detail within another marker for every single element or detail that you deem important in the text. For example, people, dates, formulas, and events. But this isn't all. Typically, we have about 2 markers per paragraph with around 4 details each, depending on the density of the material and the length of the paragraph. This works out to be about 10 to 12 fully fleshed out and detailed markers per page. Now, you won't always create that many, and during the first few weeks or month, you won't always remember them all. But that's not a big deal, because it's better to be mindful and to create all of these markers for significant details that you wish to remember. This way, if you forget some of the markers, you can reverse engineer if necessary, like we said before, assuming you've encoded in enough detailed information. Essentially, we're using the bottom-up method of remembering rather than the more common top-down method. All of this is going to take time, and you're going to have to practice for a long time to create high-quality markers quickly. You'll know your markers are improving when you're able to summarize and deduct the entire meaning of a concept or story simply by recalling the list of markers you have as a slideshow. Now, that was quite a bit to take in, and so let's review what we've learned about high-quality markers. First and foremost, high-quality markers represent details, not overall concepts, and we can describe them in 1 to 2 words. Next, high-quality markers are themselves imbued with rich detail, such as colors, textures, and so on. Number 3, high-quality markers are clearly and logically interconnected to one another, both backwards and forwards. Number 4, high-quality markers emphasize outcomes or resolutions, not questions or initial conflicts. Number 5, high-quality markers come in volume. The more, the merrier. And lastly, number 6, markers draw upon existing knowledge wherever possible. Great! So now you understand how choosing good and detailed markers will allow you to reverse engineer a much greater overall understanding and recall of the text. In the course syllabus, you're going to start finding games and exercise that you'll do every single day as homework. These exercises will give you a few images and then swarm them in a bunch of other images and ask you to remember which ones were the original images. I want you to try doing this without markers or detail, and then try encoding each one of these images to a detailed marker or existing memory. If there's an image of a rabbit, think of a childhood friend who had a rabbit and picture playing with that rabbit. Try again and see how much more effective you are when you carefully dual encode details and existing memories.